Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Face It with Dr. G. I'm Dr. G, and I have the pleasure of having an incredible woman, mother, entrepreneur, CEO, author with us today to tell us all of her tips, secrets, information, talk about her background, everything uh, in between all of those. And her name is Alyssa Rapp. She is the CEO of Empower, and she's the author of Leadership and Life Hacks. And we are so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much for bringing me in, Dr. G. It's a pleasure to be here. And I've seen some great episodes on this podcast, and I'm grateful to be included and invited in.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And just to start off, I would love for you to share a little bit about your background. I am personally reading your book, as I mentioned, and you can give the Cliff Notes version of your background, a little bit about your childhood and what got you to where you are today.
Well, the journey has actually been quite a windy road, as my mother once said. If you looked at your career at the beginning and saw where it would twist and turn and end, you would never believe the story. But in retrospect, it always makes sense. I don't know if you feel the same way. I started my career in right out of college working for who I thought was the most interesting political race of the 2000 era in Hillary Clinton's first Senate race. And that was an interesting race. It was an interesting journey. It taught me I did not want to run for the U.S. Senate, but loved what I learned that summer. And then ended up the national finance director for a U.S. congresswoman in Chicago and created for her a Women Lead program and created the first annual Ultimate Women's Power Lunch, which has been a small brand in politics that has turned into a 3,000 person annual event. And I learned in that experience in my early 20s, I liked starting things and creating things and had that entrepreneurial streak. I thought I did like my grandfather and my stepfather, but I confirmed that for myself. And that's why I headed out to business school at Stanford, where I fell in love with two things: my husband and partner of the last 20 years, as well as my kind of first business idea that I stumbled into in the wine industry. And in the wine industry, I was interested in creating the Netflix for wine. And it was a great journey and a hard run. We had a big regulatory shift in the middle of it. So pivoted from e-commerce to a media company, but then ended up finding our footing again and partnering with Condé Nast and learned a ton. It was a really great 10-year career, like two companies in one. We landed that plane to a hedge fund in Chicago who actually later ended up investing in a fund I raised, Healthwell Investment Corporation, a SPAC. But in between, I ended up doing work after I exited my first company with a bunch of private equity firms who also had wine investments or investments in luxury goods companies, which is where I had spent, 25 to age 35. And in those 2 years, I loved what I learned about private equity. I liked the speed in the sport. As a childhood athlete, I liked that it was a really, in many ways, egalitarian game. How much value you drove and how quickly you could build something is a very tangible thing to do. And as a Midwest girl, that made sense to me, different from venture capital, which I had lived in for 10 years and loved to invest in seed stage companies, particularly founded by women, but not exclusively. And I liked the speed and sport of private equity. So when my husband and I moved back to Chicago now 8 years ago, which is hard to believe, I knew I would take that as an opportunity to step into a CEO role in a private equity backed environment, different from venture, but I had no idea it would be healthcare. And it's a long story, but the end of it is the result of the book you mentioned, Leadership and Life Hacks. And as I moved back to Chicago and took the helm of Surgical Solutions, I sort of looked myself in the mirror and said, what have I done? I've just spent 10 years in e-commerce in Silicon Valley and high tech America. And now I'm coming back to run an old line healthcare services business that felt like a 20-year time warp. And I had not gone further than an AP biology class in my senior year of high school, and I did fine. But a doctor like you, Dr. G, I am not. So I thought, what have I done here? My best friend for the last 30 years, who's a ENT surgeon at Stanford, said to me, I can't believe you're running a healthcare company. You could barely get through a fetal pig dissection. But alas, I had a thesis that great leadership transcended industry. And that was a turnaround at Surgical Solutions. And with a wonderful team and a patient private equity sponsor, we got that business model turned around and sold and up to the right. And the sale happened after about 3 years, which is a really, well, even less, which is a really good thing to happen in private equity land. So what I learned in that experience is I liked healthcare a lot. I felt like there was a lot of opportunity for tech enablement. And so that's when I left after we got the company sold and I spent a year transitioning it to the new owners. I then realized I wanted to raise my own fund in Healthwell, and that would be something to invest in healthcare taking a tech company, a health tech company public. And we had a lot of great things going for us, including an incredible board of directors and investment team. The market timing for that was SPACs were very much in favor when we started and very much out of favor quickly thereafter. So that's a different conversation for a different time. It had a 24-month shot clock. We ran it out. We had a deal announced that I thought would have gotten done, and it didn't, but it was a great life experience. I learned a lot about investing, and I think that as I said in the beginning, you live your life forward, not backwards. So looking back, that combination of mergers and acquisitions training coupled with operating experience from the previous two companies does kind of set me up for where we are today at Empower. And the answer is I, along that journey, joined two boards in women's health for Shore Capital Partners in Chicago. The first is an OBGYN roll-up called Together Women's Health, now in its fifth year, doing well, and been a pleasure to watch that team really crush it in the space in spite of some setbacks and twists and turns. They've done a beautiful job executing. And I liked what I saw in Shore Capital as a private equity sponsor. I'd worked with 4 or 5 at that point as advisors or, of course, as a CEO. And I liked what I saw in Shore. I liked that they were founder friendly. I liked that they were playing in the microcap space, which means smaller companies, and rolling them up with really Fortune 500 management teams that can then help take this collection of smaller companies to the next level. And so when they thought about launching a second women's health platform in medical aesthetics, I said, yes, I'd like to learn more. Yes, I'd like to be on the board. And they brought me to AmSpa, and we kind of I helped them iterate on the thesis. And in the end, spent a year and change on the board. And when there was a CEO, the original CEO needed to step away for personal and family reasons. I was on the board of the company. It was timed almost too serendipitously with me wrapping up HealthWell. They asked me to step from the board into the CEO chair. And so for the last 18 months, I've spent a year and a half as the CEO of a medical aesthetics platform. Botox Barbie, I am not, but passionate about women entrepreneurs and passionate about medical aesthetics to preserve, youth and beauty and self-confidence. I think makes a ton of sense and is very much on brand for me, as is putting millions of dollars in the hands of women entrepreneurs with whom we partner. So that's the quick and dirty of how we started. I started as a .com CEO and ended up the CEO of Empower, and that's obviously Dr. G, how our paths have crossed.
Absolutely. And that is just phenomenal. I mean, through my journey as an entrepreneur, I never went to business school, right? So my, fundamental education is all medical. And have not nearly given myself an MBA like you have, but you really just have to teach yourself at some point. You can't learn it from a book.
There's no better school than that of hard knocks. The business school stuff gives you 100,000 foot view, but as you know, running a business, and I know running a business, at best you're at 30,000 feet. So business school is wonderful, and it's a wonderful tool and a wonderful network. And I'm incredibly grateful for it on many levels, which is why I teach there now, because I want to give back at some of the top business schools in the country. But to be frank, what you learn about running a business every day, you've learned just like I have, and it's by doing, and it's hard. It's hard, it's gratifying, and the goal is to make fewer and fewer mistakes over time by studying the conventional wisdom and learning from your own life experience. That's the most valuable of all.
Yeah, absolutely. And having people in your life like you and mentors that can share their experiences. So I'm interested, you have obviously so many balls in the air, several years ago, and I personally am thinking about writing a book, and you have obviously written a book. What was that aha moment or turning point where you were like, I'm going to do it now? What changed? What told you you had time to do it? Did you feel like you had a certain
You
level of
never have time to do it, just like you never have time to do kids. So have kids. You do it when the moment in life seizes you and you want to seize the moment. Carpe diem. This was an interesting moment though, because as I transitioned from a consumer internet career of 10 years and into healthcare and into a turnaround from the West Coast back to the Midwest, from consumer facing business to business businesses. I went from, coming up with creative ways to first, market and educate people about wine online, and then educate and entertain the next generation of wine enthusiasts, to thinking about how to take a business model that involved human capital, labor, and disposable management, as well as repairs incidences for, minimally invasive surgeries for initially 20 hospitals. And when we were done, 30 plus, that is a fundamental shift in industries and even experiences and even size and scale that's both rare and hard to do. And I'm not saying rare because, oh, I'm so wonderful. I'm saying it's just hard to do. There's a reason when you spend 10,000 hours at something, you become an expert in it. So as I took the helm, accepted the role, I should say, of being the CEO of Surgical Solutions, there were things I had good instincts on, like doing, coffees and jeans and, and sweaters over winter break before I took the CEO role, with who were then the top lieutenants, versus just showing up day one in a suit and heels in an intimidating context. That I knew to do. But there were other things I didn't know to do. So when I said yes to this role, I picked up the phone and called close friends who were CEOs who had done turnarounds, called close friends who had been healthcare executives, asked for their reading list, asked for their cheat sheet, asked what they would do if they were in my shoes, took a bunch of notes, read a bunch of books, did a lot of thinking. And then I said to myself, okay, that's one piece of work. And now I need to spend the time thinking about all the different phases of my own life that have prepared me for this moment. And whether it's high school athletics or the decade I spent running the .com or different elements of who I had developed into as an athlete, as a person, and thinking about those different life experiences and what had they prepared me for this moment and what was my battle plan going to be, my first 100-day plan and then my first year plan and then the 2-year plan. That work was pretty heavy. And when I stopped after the first month as I was stepping into the chair, and I said, wow, if I could spare anyone else the school of hard knocks of doing what I just did and distilling it, then I really should. And I did do that. And I did that through my work through my first few months at Surgical. And then when I stopped, and at that point, that was when serendipity played a role as well. I ended up writing a couple articles for Forbes.com over the years, and Forbes Books approached me and said, we like what you wrote here. We like what you wrote there. We think they could be the basis of a book. And so I spent time with a potential editor of theirs, and she and I sat down and kind of talked through what the arc of the story was going to be. And it evolved into what Leadership and Life Hacks was, where it was really the first 2/3 is about leadership hacks for management, managing teams, managing key stakeholders like boards of directors, all the things. And then the last third of it was more organic of, life hacks. How do you manage your life as a working wife and mom while you're doing all that? I have to be honest with you, of the dozens and dozens of women in corporate America with whom I've spoken about the book, they all want to talk life hacks. The leadership stuff is great and I love it and I live by it, but it's the life hacks that people find most either curious or convincing. But the answer to your question is, why I did it was because I wanted to spare anyone else the school of hard knocks I had just gone through in switching industries and this turnaround and taking a stock in my life and my life experiences at 40 and what it would take to do this. How I did it was actually with a great editor, first and foremost. I think you always need a great editor. Brie Barton was fantastic. She came from Forbes Books at the time. She now has her own company. What we did is we sat down after we outlined the book and I talked through and dictated each chapter. I told my story. I talked through my thoughts. I did not have the time or bandwidth to move to a writer's cabin for a month and just lock myself away and do it. It was just completely impractical and not organic. So I would talk through that chapter, and she and I spent a day or two together live in multiple cities, whether I was teaching at Stanford at the time or at Chicago running Surgical, whatever the case may be. And then once that chapter had been talked through, we used AI even then to translate it into text recognition and translate it into a working manuscript. And then I took a pass at the chapter, she took a pass, I took a pass, and she took a pass, and we had a chapter in the can. So we did 6 chapters that way. And then 2, as I already shared with you, are adaptations from articles I wrote for Forbes. You always write the intro and conclusion last. And then, shaping it into 101 pithy hacks was the final step where we took the key takeaways out of each chapter and they became the hacks that then became the front of each chapter and then were sprinkled throughout. So the process itself took 6 or 7 months and it was done in bite-sized chunks. And that is what was required, given that I was running a company, a mom of 2, a wife to Hal, and teaching and all the things I do. It worked for me. As the pandemic hit, and I kept getting a bunch of inbounds because my book had been out about 6 months at that point. At that point, then I kept saying, well, what's your hack for the COVID era? What's your hack for this? What's your hack for that? That's when I did it the more traditional way. And I said, listen, I'm not doing this for real money. I'm not going to go through a publisher. It's too much work and not fast enough. I'm going to go do a little compending edition of Hacks for the New World, self-published with Brie's help, just to get the answer to the question of what are your hacks for this sheltering in place era on paper, so I don't have to write a custom email every time. And that I did for the love of the game and the love of the audience. The book, Leadership and Life Hacks, was done. And that was traditional, like sit down and crank it out on Sundays. But the way I wrote the original book was as described.
And it just makes it less overwhelming. It seems manageable in the day.
I think someday in my life, I'd love to sit in a room all day and have nothing to do but write. I just don't know when that day is going to be. So until then, this is the way to do it while you're running your practice, while you're hosting a podcast, while you're a mom, just like you are, Dr. G. To do it is to do it in chunks and to do it with the support of technology and AI enablement and to talk through it and then have it transcribed and then see it on paper and then shape it. For me, that was a very efficient writing style. I actually love to write and I write quickly, but actually I talk even more quickly than I write. So it worked for me. It may not work for everyone, but it worked for me.
Very similar.
Yeah.
So circling back to the life hacks, everyone seems to
Hmm.
be really interested in the life hacks. Is there one that you mentioned in your book that had the most impact on you and your personal growth or professional life?
And it's a pretty obvious answer to that question, although it takes a minute to explain. So there's a hack in the book called Seek Episodic versus Daily Balance. And I think it's the most iconoclastic piece of advice in there for working women. Because the historical perspective has always been you can have it all, you can do it all this. And I'm not saying you can't, I think you can, but not all at once. And what that means is that I view balance as something to be achieved not in a single day, but over a longer period of time. There are things one has to do every day, and I talk about them in the book, like put your own oxygen mask on first, whatever that means. For me, that means spend an hour working out because that's my sanity. It's not even about vanity, but others, it could be meditation, it could be walking your dog, it could be a cup of coffee staring at the sea. It's not for me to describe. But for put your own oxygen mask on first, you owe it to yourself. And if you don't do it, the rest of the day just sucks the life out of you. And I take it one step further and say it's your responsibility to put your own oxygen mask on first. And if you don't, shame on you. And then the next piece of this idea of episodic balance is being ruthlessly honest with yourself of whom you're prioritizing in a given day. So there are days that I have to be a CEO and a lecturer in management. There are days that I have to be a CEO and a mom. There are days that I'm going to be a CEO and a wife. Then there are going to be days where I'm just going to be a mom and a wife. And there are days I'm going to be a daughter and a CEO, or a daughter and a mom. And my point in saying that is that each day I actually am pretty conscientious of which two stakeholders I'm prioritizing. And the reason is that those stakeholders, if you only prioritize two in a day, it doesn't mean you ignore all the rest. It doesn't mean our dog doesn't get a walk. It doesn't mean I ignore my husband, but it means that like these are the two I'm going to try to nail today. I better leave it all in the field because those are the two I'm going to nail today. And the next day might be, a different focal point. And to achieve balance means to focusing on all of the stakeholders you care about, but over a longer period of time. That the episode isn't a single day, it's several days or a week or even 2 weeks. And in that period of time, have I shown up for my spouse? Have I shown up for my children? Have I shown up for my job as much as I want to and need to? Have I showed up for myself? Have I showed up for my mother who's going through great loss this year? Right? Those are the things that I think about. And if I can do that over a period of time, it's more achievable. And it puts the pressure on you to be very prioritized in a given day about what you're going to do because you don't have that day again. That I think is iconoclastic. And if I woke up every single day trying to be the perfect mom and the perfect wife and the perfect CEO and the perfect daughter and the perfect best friend and the perfect this and the perfect that, I'd be frozen before I began with overwhelm. But if I get really clear and crisp about what am I trying to achieve that day and whom am I trying to satisfy as stakeholders go, it is infinitely more achievable, and it is also hopefully a way I have found to achieve balance. It's just not traditional because it requires discipline and transparency with yourself of who you're prioritizing in a given day.
Yeah, and you feel better about putting forward, a very focused effort and energy into those two priorities that day instead of spreading yourself so thin, feeling guilty that you didn't do enough over, yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Exactly. And taking it one step further, it also means that when you are also doing that, you're also putting yourself first, and you have to do something for yourself every day. And that is I think a lot of people I know and women I know play victim in that role. And I hold them accountable and I say, listen, we all have demands on our time that are really tough, and they're really tough. We all do who working moms. It's hard, but there's no one's responsibility but to put your own oxygen mask on first, but your own. And the world doesn't owe you a damn thing. And I think that's the piece where it's like, ooh, I thought she was a feminist. Well, I am. Because I say, if you got to put yourself on, you have to take care of you. No one else is going to. And you should expect that you have to, but then you have to prioritize it. And that means if it's 5 to 6 a.m. in the calendar in the gym, and that's just the only time it exists, that's the time. And the alarm goes off at 4:45 and it's tiring and it's early and like that's not ideal, but like that's the time. And if you've committed to something with your spouse and it's the night or it's in a different city or it's a day and it's tough to make happen, planes, trains, and automobiles, but that's the commitment and that's a stakeholder you value, then you better show up. And it's not easy and it's not fun and sometimes it's expensive. It's hopefully fun when you're together, but like the point being that it's not easy is the better point than it's not fun. It is fun, but it's not easy. But if you don't treat those, the grass grows where the sun shines. And that is the piece of this that I've learned, and it's hard. And it means that showing up means two things: physically being there, showing up matters. So I guess the other most important hack in the book from a personal standpoint, I firmly believe that showing up matters in the flesh with 2 feet, and the next best is on Zoom. But showing up matters, doing what you say you're going to do always. And then the third piece I'd say is it gets harder and harder as your job gets more and more demanding, showing up also not just physically but mentally, right? To make sure you turn off the noise in your brain on all the different demands and really being present. That to me is hard. It's not easy when you've got so much cooking, and it's like, how do you put that down and really, whether it's a car ride with your kid or whatever the case may be, a family dinner, really being trying to soak it all in. Because if you're there but on your phone, then why be there?
Right.
And that's hard too. I mean, I'm not saying I'm perfect at that. I'm just saying that's the aspiration, to just being ruthlessly honest with yourself about why being present matters.
When did you realize this prioritization? Because I feel I now do try really hard to prioritize, and when I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids, and
Right.
I'm really present. But it wasn't always like that. And for you, do you feel like it's taken life experiences to get you here?
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is Hal and I have been together 20 years, and the first 10 years we were together, his kids from his first marriage were very young. And so I saw him have to do it, right, when he was with them, and be really prioritizing being present or not, because when they're not there, you don't have the opportunity to be. And I would try to do that with them. And then, of course, with the startup, I mean, I've run several companies at this point. They're all in different phases of all consuming. And companies that you're committed to running well are all consuming. They take up your shower time, they wake you up in the middle of the night, sometimes good stress, sometimes bad, but they to lead effectively, you need to be consumed by something. That's how great leaders lead. But the question is, how do you turn that off at moments in order to focus on the other people in your life that matter, and yourself, and to not get overcooked, right, and fried? So I think that, yes, it's a function of life experience. Obviously, when you're running a startup in Silicon Valley, Hal and I were living together, but weren't married, didn't have kids of our own. It's a lot easier than when you're running a company later in life with your children and your husband. And it's not harder. In some ways, it's easier because you have more resources as you grow and you build your career. And in some ways, it's harder because, it's there's just more people for whom you are responsible. But, I'm running Empower, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience, as hard as it is, because I have a team of extraordinary people who each care deeply about their mission, vision, and values, our mission, vision, and values here. And so that's why it's not demanding because only because the private equity firm who's sponsoring us is demanding, and that is part of it. But it's demanding because we all have a high expectation of performance of ourselves and each other and this platform. And that requires an outsized effort. And so, yeah, it's hard, but I think I realized pieces of it along the way, and the need to take care of yourself. I've known since I started my first company, because if you don't, I mean, startups and high growth companies, they can suck the lifeblood out of you, and you got to do something to take care of yourself, for sure.
I want to go back to your gymnast years, and I was a professionally and classically trained ballerina.
Oh, that is so impressive and admirable and hard.
Well, so are you though. So tell me a little bit about your gymnastics career and how you think that gave you skills in a toolbox.
Yeah, I think that sports or dance at the highest level, like you performed and members of my team have performed, I think for women in leadership, it's absolutely instrumental. And I think there's some extraordinary stat, like over 90% of all women leader CEOs were childhood athletes. It's pretty staggering, actually. There is a piece of discipline, grit, resilience, and dedication that comes from having done what I've done or what you've done, that I don't know anything that teaches you that better than, gymnastics or dance at the highest levels. There's a piece of physical discipline, there's a piece of emotional discipline, there's a piece of all those things which are simply required to be the most effective leader that you can be in the world, and leading teams of people. And separately, I think the willingness to dream big, have big goals, work toward them in bite-sized chunks every day. Every time you learn a new skill on the balance beam, it's this incredibly excruciating journey of, you first put a piece of white tape on the floor exercise, then you learn how to do the back handspring, layout, step out, back handspring, for example, on that piece of white tape, on a straight line, on the floor, nothing you can fall off. And then you go and you do it on a balance beam on the floor, and you put blue mats up so it's flush with the floors. The white line is now a hard balance beam, but it's got mats up to it. So in theory, it's not that different. It's a little physically different, but not that different. Once you can do that on the balance beam on the floor, and the mats are gone, you can do it on the beam 4 feet above the ground. The only difference is psychological. The only difference is, can you conquer the fear and beat it into submission in order to do something hard? And that part of conquering fear and having courage and having commitment and acknowledging the fear and moving through it, that is the same stuff from which entrepreneurship is made. That is the same stuff for which building companies in a rapid fire way is made. That's the having a goal, having a mission, setting a strategy how to achieve that goal and achieve that mission, and then doing it and relentlessly pursuing it and wanting it more than you feared and picking great coaches and teammates alongside you to go for it. I mean, that is the exact stuff that my life experience in business has been built on. And I think that the reason I'm grateful our children are athletes and pursuing their own, they're 12 and 10 now, Audrey and Henriette, and one's in seriously competitive tennis player and the other's a wonderful equestrian hunter jumper. The reason I like their sports for them, even though they both make my stomach turn for different reasons, watching them, it's like a piece of your heart's out there competing that you can't control, is also because I love what it teaches them about themselves, that you have to shake off the losses and learn to be a graceful loser and a graceful winner and a resilient loser when you have losses. You have to learn how to be a great teammate, so even to yourself, and be graceful with yourself. You have to learn how to, battle in times of high pressure. I mean, all that's the stuff of life. I mean, you run your own business, Dr. G. It's the stuff of life. It doesn't all go your way. It's character is a function of who you are when you've been knocked down, not, who can beat on their chest loudly enough from the top of the mountain. I mean, anyone can do that. Getting there is the hard part.
I think what's so fascinating about both ballet and gymnastics is they're a combination of an individual sport and a group sport. So it gives you skills to be on stage to speak or on stage to dance solo, and gymnasts the same, but also working in a team and being part of a team and group effort and dancing together, having the same movements, the harmony, the rhythm. So I think that's what's really unique about those two specifically. And I do, I think
I agree with you. And the musicality and the teamwork and the self-confidence and the choreography. I was a choreographer in high school and in college at Yale, and I love choreography. It's my great love besides writing, to be honest with you, from a creative standpoint. Putting bodies to movement to music where sometimes they're synchronized and sometimes they're intentionally not, right? Asynchronous to make a point. I mean, all of that, sometimes I'd set a piece to one music and then actually change the piece of music in order to see what happened. I mean, it's ultimately, all of that is also the stuff for which, business is made. And I even think about, we use the word choreography as it relates to our mergers and acquisitions process at Empower, because when we're working with a new partner, there is a choreography to it. There's a get to know you phase. There's a due diligence, get in deep into the math phase. Then there's is there the art of a deal phase? And then if there is a deal to be had, who are the stakeholders? Are they people who are great brokers in the space? So is it just the entrepreneur on her own? Is it all the above? How does that change the choreography? Then you get to a point, you might have a letter of intent. Then one of my board members, John Nelson of Southern Orthodontics Partners, describes as well, as you're into a deal, even if it's going well, there's this point of a valley of indifference where an entrepreneur is running her business and running this process and is so exhausted and frustrated and is like, do I really want to do this anymore? And then how do you keep that momentum? I mean, it's a really interesting journey. And I think the choreography of that, we at Empower get better at every partnership, but it is choreography. And so I've learned a ton. I mean, I could go on and on for hours about everything that I learned as a child athlete or dancer and a choreographer that I think translates to business. There's almost no end to the metaphor, but I do think yeah, go ahead.
Would you say, I have two questions. Would you say you ask a lot of questions, and has that helped you through your journey? And then also the second part of that is, would you say you're a reasonable or unreasonable thinker in general? How do you feel?
The latter probably depends who you ask. My 12-year-old would probably give you a different answer than my husband would give me a different answer than my mother, give you a different answer than my team. Jokes aside, am I a reasonable thinker? I think my job as a CEO is to be just reasonable enough, but to set a set of expectations that we are all striving toward, that are by definition hard to achieve, at least in the companies I want to run, inspire each of the people on the team to want to achieve that goal by being the best version of him or herself. That is my job. Do I ask questions? Of course. My most important job, I think, is to inspire people to ask questions of themselves, though.
Yes.
Questions for questions' sake don't really matter. It's, if this is the mission and here's our vision and here are the values through which we're going to lead this organization to get here, how are you going to do it?
Yes.
How are you going to do it head of finance? How are you going to do it head of operations? How are you going to do it head of marketing? How are you going to do it head of technology? How are you going to do it head of people?
Yeah. The ultimate delegation, right? So you're not doing it for them. You're allowing them to think and expand their mind.
Well, and to own the outcome, right?
And to
Because
own.
I've learned the hard way. You can't do it all yourself. You'll run yourself into the ground, and you won't achieve the goal. But my job isn't to figure it all out solely. My job is to bring the right group of people together, set a course and a north star of where we're going, and leverage their talent and teamwork to get there. That's my job, and that job is fun. So am I very, if we're all rowing in the same direction, very, very.
Because I tell myself I'm extremely unreasonable because I think of things that no one else has done or would even attempt to do, or they would say you're nuts. Have you read the book by Ron Shaich?
Which one?
Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name of it. The
It's
founder
okay.
of Panera and Tate, and oh, I'll get it to you.
It's all good.
Let me look it up right now. But anyway, it's great. And I think, when you do things that people from the outside looking in are like, what in the world is this person doing? Breaking down a company that's doing well to do something else that's completely unreasonable. But that's okay. And I think taking those risks and thinking in an unreasonable way is actually what makes us who we are. Know what matters is the one.
Yeah, and the piece, oh no, it matters. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, culture eats strategy for lunch, but you need a strategy. So if you think of things like Blockbuster, why did Netflix disrupt Blockbuster? Because they were too set in their ways, and it's always going to be better to cannibalize yourself and reinvent yourself than to let someone else do it, right? And so is that reasonable or unreasonable? I don't know if I mean, it's a dicey question that you ask. I don't think it matters. I think what matters is, are you being ruthlessly honest about what your strategy is and what your goals are and what your mission, vision, and values are, and constantly aligning on that North Star and retooling and refining. Just like if you are slightly off balance in, a pirouette, you adjust. What's the goal of the piece? It's not, you have to be exacting to achieve the goal, even if you have to be adaptable along.
Yeah, I agree. I just listened to an amazing webinar on strategy by a professor at Harvard Business School. I should send it over to you and I can,
Yeah, which one? I know a few of those guys and gals.
I can't think of it off the top of my head, but I'll send it to
It's
you.
okay, just ping me. Yeah.
Yeah, I will. Okay, one last thing. We've been talking for so long, I could keep going forever. What is one of the biggest challenges you've had in leadership, other than the personal life and balancing all, juggling everything? You mentioned in your book about bottle notes and
Yeah,
how,
that was tough.
really, what do you think that you can explain it, but was that the toughest or?
I think I'll give you two different answers, one that's in the book and one that's for the next book. How about that?
Okay, great. I love it.
Um, but so for the market timing, the exogenous factors, I've been on the right side of market timing and the wrong side of market timing, right? So in bottle notes, we had this massive regulatory shift in how third-party marketing firms review that forced us to pivot business models. And the chapter in that is called Pivot versus Quit. That was hard. I mean, that is an existential crisis. We did nothing wrong. We were actually on the right track. And boom, this whole thing then pivoted. Said differently, at my SPAC, I had a perfect team. We had a perfect strategy, and the rules of the game changed within 3 months of launching. I mean, with filing with the SEC. I mean, you can't. That's the stuff you cannot control. Even the way the FDA has been approaching GLP-1s in the med spa space of late, we only have a very small piece of our total puzzle that has been exposed to that. But I will say, I mean, even things like that, you cannot control those regulatory headwinds. You simply cannot. So those things are tough because even the most brilliant teams with the most winning strategies, there are some I learned with the SPAC world, particularly, it was a very painful lesson. There are some tsunamis that
Just can't avoid.
you can't survive, which sucks. And that's a hard thing for me to accept because I'm a pathological optimist. Is it the hardest thing in business? It's been one of the hardest. I think the other hardest thing in business, and one of my mentors, Joel Peterson, is really wonderful on this topic. Even the best of the best hiring managers only get it right about 8 out of 10 times. The best of the best in the world. So if you're the best and the best in the world and you're getting that right 8 out of 10 times, man, does it sting the 2 out of 10 times when you don't get it right, when you did not pick the right person for the role. And that is actually not just that person's fault, right? It's my fault if I didn't pick the right person for the role and I didn't set him or her up for success. That probably stings more. And that the exogenous piece is life happening out of your control and learning to adapt and be resilient and fight for the win 9 times out of 10. That I know how to do, and I hopefully get better and better at every time of realizing when it's a tsunami and not, right? When to pivot versus quit. Because the white knuckle death grip to the end isn't always the right answer. I've learned the hard way, no matter how resilient you are. That said, that feels sort of outside of one's control. The piece of the picking, Joel Peterson says, and get even the best of the best don't get it right 100% of the time. That feels in one's control. And man, does that, learning the whole adage of hire slowly, terminate quickly, and make change quickly. That, when you know what's wrong, that is hard. It's no matter how, you lose your humanity if you lose your feeling empathetic for when it's time for transitions in organizations. That hurts and it stings. And I think that that's probably, on a personal note, the hardest thing for me in business. Like, my husband Hal will tell you, the first time someone quit on me, I literally cried all night. It was so personal. I couldn't believe someone was going to quit. It just hurt so much. And it's like, now that gets easier over time, but learning how to ensure you're optimizing for the right team, for the mission, that is the job of a leader. And that is hard. I think that is the hardest piece of leadership.
Yeah.
And what you need changes over time, which is the hardest piece of all, especially in a high growth enterprise.
Okay, one last thing. So
Mm-hmm.
you're obviously, on the private equity side of medical aesthetics and acquiring these
Mm-hmm.
aesthetic practices. This may be a little bit of a loaded question, and give me whatever you can, but do you think that, there's obviously consolidation of the industry in the past year, 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
ABC changes, and when you're looking to sell or preparing to sell, do you think that people should be doing research about the right time? What do you see moving forward? Do you see more consolidation? Do you see slowing down? What are your
Yeah,
predictions?
that's a very easy question to answer. I do not believe you can time markets. The only people in the world I trust to even get close to timing markets are people like Warren Buffett or John Rogers at Ariel Capital, and they usually get it right 95% of the time. I think market timing is tough. And I've seen it where I've been on the right side of it and the wrong side of it. And I don't know if you can take 100% credit either direction by any means. So, what can you do? Run a great business. What can you do? Be honest with yourself when you feel like you've hit the local maximum of all you can bring to that business. What can you also do? Be thoughtful and take your time in building relationships in space with people with whom you might want to partner, because it's a partnership. At least the way we view it at Empower and at Shore. So if it's a partnership, it's like any relationship, it takes time to build trust. And if there's a trusting relationship, which is going to be the most important thing, the math matters. The math has to make sense for both parties, otherwise there's no deal to be had. But let's assume the math is going to be within 10% because markets are efficient, within 3 or 4 different private equity platforms, by and large, right? Some are going to have more rollover equity, some are going to have more upside on the second bite of the apple, some are going to give you more cash up front, but give you less control once you quote unquote partner. But let's assume, if markets are efficient, that the math is going to be within a zone of compromise. It's pretty consistent. It's all about the people. And you go to bed one day and you own the whole thing yourself, and you woke up the next day and you're partner with a whole new person. And partnering is hard. Partnering is work. Partnering has ups and downs. And so then it becomes the people and the company you keep that matters most. So I would argue and advise that people in the position of your listeners or your colleagues, my advice is not to time markets. Consolidation is here. It's going to happen at an accelerated rate. We are going to have 4 or 5 winners in the space as consolidators go. Then the consolidators are going to get consolidated. That's the way this game is played if you're a student of the game. In multi-site healthcare, with all due respect to medical aesthetics, where it's early innings, this is what happens time and time and time and time again, especially in cash pay businesses. So if the train has left the station, and several trains are left the station, they're out. It is happening. You can't avoid it. No offense. It's here. You always want to try to pick people earlier than later in the journey. And so it's your choice. You get your pick of with whom you partner. And rather than time the market, I would focus on the best deal for you and the best partnership for you, whether it's you, Dr. G, or anyone else, and make those the major decision points, because those are things you can't control. And businesses don't get sold, they get bought. So the relationship piece is what I really think you need to focus on the most, because you can always leverage a multitude of offers to get the best offer, which is what, when you work with a great broker, you do need to be sure you're picking the right people, because the people are with whom you're going to be on calls and spending time after the fact. And it's just a brand new partnership. And I fear that that's what people forget. And the best deals I've been part of over the last 20 work the best when the people piece of it clicks. And we spend a lot of time at Empower working on the people piece of it, and having a clinical advisor board, and having a annual seller summit, and all the things. So I feel quite strongly about that. And it's because you're joining a bigger team. You're a quilt. You're a new set of squares in a much broader puzzle. Make sure that you like the other people who have partnered with the same private equity firm, and make sure you like the firm itself and the leadership of the organization. And then you'll be making the right choice for you.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think for me, it's hard to anticipate selling your company, being bought, and then having to continue to work. I think that's a surprise to many people, because you're often asked to stay on as.
I mean, the best firms are going to want you because you're the person who built it, and they're going to want you for 3 to 5 years. And so what we have found with our partners is it becomes different. They're in many ways, the shock is that they feel a renewed sense of motivation and drive because they're part of something bigger than themselves. Back to your question about sports and teams. They're part of something bigger than themselves. They don't want to let the other people down. They want to prove they were the right teammate to have been drafted. It's a very different psychology than waking up every day with the sole responsibility for your own business. I've done both, by the way. I've bought and I've sold, and now we're doing both as we speak. And the second after you sell, you're now a buyer of other people because your rollover equity is now you own a piece of all these other med spas. It's a very different game, and it's a fun game. And so just doing what you've done that you do for yourself effectively as a sole player, and then you flip and now you're doing for other people, that would not be fun. Joining a winning team and doing something, bringing your superpowers to the table and then learning from all the other people's superpowers, that's fun. That's a different, it's just, as my husband would say, who was a professional baseball player, it's playing in the big leagues, and that's fun.
I love that.
That's the why to do it.
I love that. I love that.
Good.
Hopefully that was helpful for everybody considering, and I'll put it in my back pocket for who knows what.
Thank you.
When I get to 20 locations, Alyssa, that's my goal.
Good. Well, you can keep in touch between them. We're happy to stay in touch and partner with you before, during, and after that point. And thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate you bringing me on. I know you've had a lot of incredible people in the space, and I'm honored to be in their company.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. And for all of you listening, please contact Alyssa. How's the best way to get in touch with you?
Rapp, ARAPP at empower.spa. And then on a personal note, I've had a personal newsletter as a result of the book that you mentioned at alyssarapp.com. And I always welcome new friendly readers.
Love that. So thank you all for listening. Like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you again next time.